The file was sealed in wax the color of dried blood, stamped with the crest of the Regia Marina and the words CHA-MAS, Operazione Olterra, Massima Segretezza. It had been hidden for decades in the lower shelves of an Italian naval archive, deliberately misfiled behind logistics reports and fuel inventories. Only one line, handwritten in the margin of the first page, betrayed the magnitude of what lay inside. This was the raid that came from nowhere. The war in the Mediterranean was entering its most violent chapter. The Second World War had consumed ports, harbors, islands, and convoys from the Strait of Sicily to the Levant. British control of Malta threatened Axis supply routes. Italian and German subs prowled the sea lanes. Airfields traded bombing raids with relentless precision. And yet one place remained almost untouchable. Gibraltar, the fortress at the mouth of the Mediterranean, the gateway to the Atlantic, a British stronghold whose harbor anchored tankers, troopships, escorts, and repair vessels. Its defenses were legendary: anti-submarine nets, rotating patrol craft, searchlights sweeping the black water, coastal guns covering every approach. The British believed Gibraltar was invulnerable to underwater sabotage. They believed wrong. Because hidden not 50 meters from British patrol routes, lying quietly in the harbor of Algeciras, across the bay in neutral Spain, was an Italian merchant vessel named Olterra, a ship that appeared unable to move, its hull scarred from the early days of the war, its superstructure sagging from neglect, its colors faded under the Andalusian sun. To British observers, Olterra was a harmless, interned hulk. To Italian intelligence, she was a miracle waiting to happen. To the divers of Decima MAS, she became something else entirely, an underwater base disguised as a shipwreck. The story of how a motionless merchantman became Italy's most audacious covert weapon begins with the disaster that almost destroyed her. In 1940, as Italy entered the war, Olterra was trapped in Spanish waters. Spanish authorities, clinging to neutrality, interned her. The ship sat idle, crew detained on board, monitored lightly. Then in 1942, Italian naval intelligence noticed something extraordinary. Olterra lay positioned directly across from Gibraltar, a perfect vantage point for observing British naval movements. More importantly, her hull partially rested against the pier in such a way that a diver could emerge underwater from inside her hold and disappear beneath the waves without attracting attention. This was not a coincidence. It was opportunity. The Regia Marina quietly replaced members of Olterra's civilian crew with trained saboteurs and intelligence officers posing as mechanics and repair workers. Supplies were smuggled aboard in crates labeled as food, tools, and repair material. Spanish inspectors, uninterested in the mundane fate of a damaged merchant ship, noticed nothing unusual. Inside the steel carcass of Olterra, the Italians began carving out a secret. They welded shut unused compartments. They ripped out machinery to create space. They built a workshop where the cargo hold had once stood. They created bunks, storerooms, and pressure-sealed chambers. Finally, using stolen diving equipment and metalworking tools, they cut a hole in the hull below the waterline, a disguised underwater hatch accessible only from inside. This hatch would become the most secret doorway of the Mediterranean. Within months, Olterra had been transformed into what naval historians would one day call the most dangerous ship in the world that never sailed. Inside the hidden workshop, Italian divers assembled SLC human torpedoes, the slow-moving submersible vehicles the British mockingly nicknamed maiale. Pigs. The nickname stuck, but the weapon was lethally precise. A two-man torpedo with detachable warhead charges capable of crippling even the largest ships. The divers of Decima MAS, Veterans of the attacks on Alexandria and Malta now lived aboard Olterra disguised as civilian mechanics. They trained inside the ship, studied British patrol patterns through binoculars hidden behind broken portholes, and prepared for missions that even their own commanders considered nearly suicidal. The entire operation depended on two fragile elements: Spanish neutrality. Spain could not officially aid Italy, nor could it appear aware of the sabotage. British complacency. Gibraltar's commanders believed the Italians could not possibly mount an underwater attack from the Spanish side of the bay. Both assumptions would be exploited with precision. The first mission launched at night in August 1942. 3 SLC torpedoes slid silently out of Olterra's underwater hatch. The divers kicked into the current and descended beneath the surface, gliding across the dark bay toward Gibraltar's lights. British sentries saw nothing. Hours later, explosions echoed across the harbor. The tanker Raven's Point and the transport Fiona Shell shuddered under the blasts. 2 vessels sank. Another was crippled. Gibraltar went on alert, but there was no sign of submarines, no enemy craft on sonar, no swimmers caught in the net, no boats detected leaving Spanish waters. The British were baffled. They suspected magnetic mines. They suspected agents inside the port. They even suspected a supernatural streak of bad luck. But the idea that enemy divers could reach the harbor, let alone operate from Spain, was dismissed as impossible. It was not impossible. It was happening under their noses. Over the following months, Olterra became a hive of covert activity. Italian technicians assembled more SLC torpedoes inside her hidden workshop, cannibalizing spare parts, welding components by lantern light, adjusting guidance fins with calipers and file tools. Every mission launched from that underwater hatch had to cross the bay unseen. A journey of hours, fighting currents, dodging patrol boats whose propellers churned the water above. The divers endured cold, exhaustion, and pitch-black silence broken only by the hum of British generators along the shore. If a diver surfaced accidentally, he would be seen from a British watchtower. If he drifted too far north, Spanish police could arrest him and uncover the entire operation. But they rarely erred. Each attack was executed with surgical precision. On the night of December 7, 1942, another SLC team glided across the bay. Their targets were the British cargo ships Ravensdale and Bertie. The divers attached limpet charges beneath the hulls, set the timers, and slipped away. Hours later, British sailors awoke to explosions that rocked the harbor. 2 more ships sank or were rendered useless. Once again, no attackers were found. Gibraltar's command was humiliated. Security doubled. Patrols multiplied. Magnetic detectors swept the harbor floor. Royal engineers searched the breakwaters. Nothing. It was as if the sea itself had turned against the British. In early 1943, Olterra's team grew bolder. They launched additional raids, sabotaging the cargo ship Durham, damaging the transport Stanridge, and crippling supply vessels crucial to Allied operations supporting North Africa. At one point, an SLC malfunctioned in the harbor, and its magnetic charge drifted against a pier before detonating harmlessly. British investigators recovered fragments of the device but misidentified them as debris from an older mine. They did not realize that the metal stamping on the fragments, an Italian manufacturer's code, was evidence that enemy saboteurs had infiltrated their harbor. The truth hid in plain sight, moored innocently across the bay. Inside Olterra, Italian divers lived under perpetual tension, a coexistence of monotony, fear, and professional pride. Their entire world existed inside the steel ribs of an interned merchant ship. They read books. They played chess. They maintained their equipment obsessively. They slept in converted bunks that creaked with every shift of the hull. Above deck, Spanish officials occasionally boarded the ship for cursory inspections. The Italians, wearing greasy overalls, greeted them with polite nods and explanations about repairs that were always nearly complete. Spanish inspectors rarely ventured below deck, and when they did, they saw only hydraulic tools, paint buckets, and engine parts. They never saw the hidden hatch. They never saw the workshop. They never saw the torpedoes being built below their feet. The divers' discipline was absolute. They never carried documents. They never wrote letters detailing their work. They destroyed every blueprint after use. Their attack schedules depended on moonless nights and favorable tides. Their missions required a balance of maritime expertise and physical endurance that few soldiers on either side of the war could match. By mid-1943, the British had lost over 70,000 tons of shipping in Gibraltar to these mysterious underwater attacks. Every loss rippled across Allied logistics. Convoys rerouted, timetables adjusted, supplies delayed. The British Admiralty filed increasingly frantic reports. One naval intelligence officer wrote, "If this continues, our operational reliability in Gibraltar will be severely compromised." The attacks continued. On the night of May 8, 1943, Decima MAS launched their largest operation yet. 3 SLC torpedoes slipped from Olterra toward Gibraltar. Their targets, the freighters Pat Harrison, Mahsud, and Meta. The divers penetrated the harbor, maneuvered beneath the ships, attached their charges, and withdrew. The explosions came hours later, a thunderous triple blast that shook buildings along the quay and illuminated the bay in fire and smoke. British sailors scrambled onto decks. Fireboats roared to life. Officers shouted for sonar sweeps. Searchlights swept in useless arcs across empty water. Olterra's crew just across the bay watched from behind darkened portholes. Their faces reflected the red light of burning ships. They spoke little. Success was measured not in cheers, but in survival. The British, furious and out of explanations, intensified their search. This time they interrogated Spanish fishermen, monitored currents, and even inspected the seabed for unusual debris patterns. Some officers suspected sabotage from the Spanish coastline. Others blamed miniature submarines operating from the open sea. A few suggested infiltrators among local workers. Not one guessed the truth. The idea that a scuttled merchant ship housed a secret underwater base was simply too absurd, too far removed from conventional doctrine to be considered. And so Olterra continued her shadow war. In August 1943, Italy's government collapsed. Mussolini was overthrown. The new Italian leadership signed an armistice with the Allies on September 8th. Decima MAS divers aboard Olterra received the news in stunned silence. Their war ended without warning. British forces boarded Olterra shortly after. They searched her from stem to stern, breaking open welded compartments until they found the hidden workshop, the torpedoes, the suits, the hatch. A British officer wrote in his report, "We have been attacked for months from a ship anchored in full view of Gibraltar. Their ingenuity exceeds anything we previously believed possible." The Olterra operation had ended, but its legacy shaped naval sabotage and special operations for decades. Intelligence analysts used it as the defining example of covert maritime infiltration. Engineers studied the modifications for insights into underwater sabotage. Commandos across the world quietly admired the audacity of converting a trapped merchant ship into an underwater strike base. Olterra never sailed again. She was eventually scrapped, her metal sold as salvage. But the echoes of what happened inside her hull remain. This is the story of the Italian saboteurs who tunneled into the heart of Gibraltar not by land, not by submarine, but by transforming an interned ship into a secret underwater base. They launched attacks from beneath the eyes of their enemy. They built a workshop inside a shipwreck. They struck again and again without ever leaving Spanish waters. And for nearly a year they shattered Allied shipping through ingenuity, courage, and silence. This was the raid that came from nowhere. The war fought from the shadows of a harbor. A mission the Allies never understood until it was already over.